I've never been a suspicious man. Maybe it's because I spent most of my life surrounded by simple, good-hearted people where a handshake meant more than any contract. Maybe it's because my late wife, Marta, was the kind of woman who always saw the best in everyone, and that rubbed off on me, like the smell of coffee in an old house. But after what happened with my family these past few months, I learned that danger doesn't always come from the eyes that glare at you. Sometimes, it hides behind the ones that smile a little too much. It all started innocently enough. My daughter-in-law, Aline, began visiting more often after Marta passed. She said she wanted to help, that it was the least she could do for the father of the man she loved. I accepted it, of course. The pain of loneliness is quiet but deep, and any gesture of care feels like a hug on the darkest days. She came often, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with dinner already made, and one day, she arrived with a cake. "I made it with love," she said, placing the warm pan on the kitchen table. "My grandmother's recipe. You're going to love it." She seemed too excited, like she was eager for me to eat it right then and there with her watching. And that's when I felt the first knot in my stomach, and it wasn't hunger. I thanked her, as usual, but told her I'd wait for it to cool a bit. She insisted, laughed, said I didn't need to wait. "You can trust me, Dad," she said, calling me that in a way that always felt rehearsed, like she practiced saying Dad in front of the mirror. I pretended not to notice. She left a little later, saying she had to stop by the store and see my son at work. I stayed there, standing in the kitchen, staring at that cake like it was Pandora's box. I even cut a slice. It smelled sweet, normal, almost childlike. But there was something else, a bitter undertone. And I know that smell. Years of caring for Marta and handling her medications taught me how to tell when something had more than it should. I held the slice up to the kitchen window. Looked perfectly normal, but my gut said otherwise. And as I've learned the hard way, an old man's instinct is rarely wrong. So I decided to test it. I gently put the slice back, smoothed it out, and covered the cake with a cloth. The next day, I called Aline and said, "Hi, sweetheart. Just wanted to thank you for the cake, but my blood pressure shot up, and the doctor told me to stay away from sweets for a few days. I saved it, of course. If you want to stop by, we can have coffee and you can try it with me." Silence on the line. Brief. Almost imperceptible. "Oh, sure, Mr. Jorge. I'll stop by. Glad you saved it." She showed up with that same practiced smile. I placed the cake on the table, poured the coffee, and with the calmest face in the world, I cut a slice and put it on her plate. "You try it first, my dear. I want to see if it's really as good as your grandmother's." She hesitated, too briefly for an untrained eye to notice. But mine were wide open now, and that's when I knew something was wrong. Deeply wrong. And that was just the beginning. Aline stared at the slice on her plate as if it suddenly turned into something foreign, something she never expected to see there. Her hands trembled just a little, but she forced a smile and picked up the fork. I watched every movement carefully, every hesitation, every blink. She took a bite. Her eyes flickered, and for a split second, I thought she might choke or even regret her choice. But then, as if rehearsed, she nodded and said, "It's really good, just like Grandma used to make." I smiled back, but inside, I was far from at ease. That night, I barely slept. The pieces were starting to fit together, but I needed proof, something concrete that would hold up if things went south. I had already started going through my medications, keeping a close eye on every pill, every bottle. The taste in that cake, the strange smell. I knew enough to suspect poison, or at least something that could seriously harm me. I called my old friend, Dr. Renato, who still practiced at the local clinic. He agreed to come over the next day, after hearing my story. When he arrived, I served him a small slice of the same cake, carefully wrapped and untouched since Aline's visit. He took it, sniffed, and frowned. "Arthur, this cake was definitely tampered with. I can't say what exactly without testing, but there are compounds here that could disrupt your medication and affect your heart. We need to analyze this immediately." I felt a cold wave wash over me. Why would she do this? Money? Control? Or something darker? The next days were a blur of lab results, family confrontations, and police reports. I showed the footage from the cameras, the moments when Aline approached my pills, her hands shaking slightly as she switched a few tablets with something else. Marcos, my son, was devastated. "Dad, I had no idea. She never showed this side around me." "I'm so sorry," I nodded, holding back my own grief and anger. "It's not your fault, son. But we have to be careful now. I won't let her hurt me or anyone else in this family." Aline was arrested shortly after. She denied everything at first, but with the evidence against her, she eventually confessed. The motive? Jealousy, greed, a twisted desire to inherit. I won't forget the look in her eyes when they took her away, the mix of hatred and fear. Now, every time I see a cake, I remember that moment. The sweetness that hides poison. But I also remember that I was alert, that I trusted my instincts, and that sometimes, to protect yourself, you have to take the first bite, so the other person doesn't. Claro, acquiescer a party 3, bem mais longa e detalhada, para fechar a historia com mais intensidade e profundidade. You tried to poison me with a cake made with love, so I gave you the first slice. Part 3. The days after Elaine's arrest were some of the hardest I've ever faced. It wasn't just the betrayal that cut deep, it was the shock of realizing how close she had come to destroying everything I held dear. Marcos was a wreck. I tried to be strong for him, but inside I was crumbling too. It's strange how grief can make you feel both empty and heavy at the same time. The house felt colder, quieter. I kept replaying those moments in my head, the forced smiles, the careful movements, the way she kept insisting on feeding me that cake. I couldn't help but ask myself, was there a way I missed? A sign I ignored? How had I not seen the danger until it was almost too late? One afternoon, as I sat alone in the living room, I noticed something on the floor near the kitchen doorway. A tiny scrap of paper, folded hastily and left behind. Curiosity got the best of me. I unfolded it carefully. Written in a shaky hand was a note: he trusts too much. Be patient. Soon everything will be mine. The handwriting was unmistakable. Elaine's. It was a chilling confirmation that this had been planned for months. I called Marcos immediately. Son, there's more to this than we thought. She didn't act alone, or at least not impulsively. We need to look deeper into her past and our family's affairs. Together, we began digging into Elaine's history. The truth was worse than I imagined. She had been involved in schemes before, using charm and deceit to manipulate people for money. Small towns don't always know everything, but the internet never forgets. Worse, she had been pressuring Marcos about the inheritance, trying to make him cut me out of the will, pushing for control of the house and the savings I'd set aside. It was greed, pure and simple. One night, after a long day of research and calls to lawyers, I sat by the window, looking out at the dark street. I realized that this wasn't just about money, it was about trust, or rather, the betrayal of it. I thought of Marta. How she always said to look for the good in people, but also to guard your heart. I made a promise then. To protect my family, to rebuild what had been broken. Marcos and I hired a private investigator. We secured the house better, installed new locks and alarms. But the most important change was inside me. I became more vigilant, yes, but also more aware. Not bitter, not angry, just cautious. Because life had taught me something valuable. Sometimes, those closest to you can be the most dangerous. Yet, even in that darkness, there is light. The support from my true friends, the kindness of neighbors, the resilience of my son, these became my armor. I no longer fear the cake on the table or the smile hiding secrets. Now, I trust my instincts, and when I offer the first slice, it's always to someone who has earned it. The days after Elaine's arrest were some of the hardest I've ever faced. It wasn't just the betrayal that cut deep, it was the shock of realizing how close she had come to destroying everything I held dear. Marcos was a wreck. I tried to be strong for him, but inside I was crumbling too. It's strange how grief can make you feel both empty and heavy at the same time. The house felt colder, quieter. I kept replaying those moments in my head, the forced smiles, the careful movements, the way she kept insisting on feeding me that cake. I couldn't help but ask myself, was there a way I missed? A sign I ignored? How had I not seen the danger until it was almost too late? One afternoon, as I sat alone in the living room, I noticed something on the floor near the kitchen doorway. A tiny scrap of paper, folded hastily and left behind. Curiosity got the best of me. I unfolded it carefully. Written in a shaky hand was a note: he trusts too much. Be patient. Soon everything will be mine. The handwriting was unmistakable. Elaine's. It was a chilling confirmation that this had been planned for months. I called Marcos immediately. Son, there's more to this than we thought. She didn't act alone, or at least not impulsively. We need to look deeper into her past and our family's affairs. Together, we began digging into Elaine's history. The truth was worse than I imagined. She had been involved in schemes before, using charm and deceit to manipulate people for money. Small towns don't always know everything, but the internet never forgets. Worse, she had been pressuring Marcos about the inheritance, trying to make him cut me out of the will, pushing for control of the house and the savings I'd set aside. It was greed, pure and simple. One night, after a long day of research and calls to lawyers, I sat by the window, looking out at the dark street. I realized that this wasn't just about money, it was about trust, or rather, the betrayal of it. I thought of Marta. How she always said to look for the good in people, but also to guard your heart. I made a promise then, to protect my family, to rebuild what had been broken. Marcos and I hired a private investigator. We secured the house better, installed new locks and alarms. But the most important change was inside me. I became more vigilant, yes, but also more aware. Not bitter, not angry, just cautious. Because life had taught me something valuable. Sometimes, those closest to you can be the most dangerous. Yet, even in that darkness, there is light. The support from my true friends, the kindness of neighbors, the resilience of my son, these became my armor. I no longer fear the cake on the table or the smile hiding secrets. Now, I trust my instincts, and when I offer the first slice, it's always to someone who has earned it. Months passed since Aline's arrest. Life in the house gradually started to feel more like home again, but the scars remained, invisible, yet profound. Marcos and I grew closer through it all. We found comfort in shared memories of Marta, and in rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. One quiet afternoon, we sat in the garden, drinking coffee and watching the birds. The sun warmed my face, and I felt a peace I hadn't known in a long time. "Dad," Marcos said softly, "I want you to know how sorry I am for everything. I wish I had seen it sooner. I almost lost you." I put a hand on his shoulder. "You didn't lose me, son. We're still here. And sometimes, the strongest thing we can do is keep moving forward, even when it's hard." We talked about forgiveness, not for Aline, but for ourselves. For the mistakes we didn't see coming, for the pain we carried. I learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened, but about freeing yourself from the weight of anger. The house no longer felt like a battlefield. It was a sanctuary, and I realized something else, too. That night, I baked a cake myself, from a recipe Marta had once written in her notebook. It wasn't perfect, the icing was a little lumpy, the edges a bit uneven, but it was made with honest hands and a full heart. I called Marcos into the kitchen. "Come on, son. Let's share this one. No secrets, no fear. Just us." He smiled and took the first slice. We ate quietly, savoring the sweetness, not just of the cake, but of survival, trust regained, and love that endures. Because in the end, life isn't about the poison others try to serve us. It's about recognizing the danger, standing strong, and choosing to share the sweetness with those who truly care. The days following that quiet moment in the kitchen, sharing the imperfect cake from Marta's old recipe, were some of the most transformative I've ever lived through. The poison that Aline had tried to serve me wasn't just in the cake, it was in the betrayal, the broken trust, the fractured family bonds. But healing was a slow, fragile thing, like coaxing a rosebud to bloom in the harshest winter. Marcos and I spent many long evenings talking, sometimes sharing laughter, sometimes shedding tears. The pain was still there, like a shadow that stretched longer with the setting sun, but we refused to let it consume us. I began going to a support group for seniors who had suffered loss and betrayal. At first, I was hesitant. I had always been the quiet observer, the man who dealt with things on his own. But opening up about the hurt, the anger, the fear, it was freeing in ways I never expected. One evening, after a particularly emotional meeting, I sat outside beneath the stars and felt something I hadn't in months: hope. The world wasn't perfect. There would always be people like Aline, those who hide poison behind sweetness. But there were also those who offer kindness without strings, who build rather than destroy. That hope was fragile, yes, but it was real. Marcos, too, began therapy. It helped him face the guilt and confusion that had haunted him since the truth came out. I saw a change in him, a softening, a growing strength. Together, we worked on rebuilding our lives. We went through the legal process. The estate was settled fairly, with Aline barred from any inheritance. Justice, in the eyes of the law, was served. But justice alone does not heal broken hearts. So, we made a decision. We would turn the family home into something new, a place of healing and gathering. With the help of friends and neighbors, we renovated the house, filling it with light, warmth, and laughter once more. I set up a small garden in Marta's memory, planting her favorite flowers, roses and jasmine. Each bloom a reminder that even after winter, life finds a way to flourish. One Sunday, we held a small gathering. Old friends, family, neighbors, people who had stood by us through thick and thin. Marcos raised a glass. To new beginnings, to resilience, to family. I looked around the room and felt an overwhelming gratitude. The darkness we had faced was real, but it didn't define us. Months later, I found myself teaching a cooking class at the local community center, sharing Marta's recipes, stories, and the lessons life had handed me. It became a way to connect, to give back, and to remind others that even the most broken moments can lead to something beautiful. One afternoon, after a class, a young woman approached me. "Mr. Jorge, your story inspired me. I'm going through a tough time, feeling betrayed by someone close. How do you find the strength to keep going?" I smiled gently. It's not about forgetting the pain, but about choosing what comes next. Sometimes, you have to taste the bitterness to appreciate the sweetness that follows. And always, trust your instincts. She nodded, eyes bright with newfound hope. That night, as I sat by the garden, I thought of Marta, of Marcos, and of the journey we'd been through. Life had tested us. It had tried to poison our bond. But love, real love, proved stronger. I realized then that the first slice I gave a line wasn't just a test. It was a declaration. That I would protect myself, that I would protect my family, that I would choose life, love, and truth, no matter what. Years passed, but the memory of what happened with a line remained a chapter of my life that shaped everything that followed, not as a wound that never healed, but as a foundation stone for something stronger, for wisdom, resilience, and a renewed purpose. Marcos and I had grown into a rhythm that felt natural, a partnership forged through hardship but filled with love and mutual respect. We'd rebuilt the family home not just as a sanctuary for ourselves, but as a place where others could find comfort and healing. One afternoon, as the golden light of late summer filtered through the kitchen window, Marcos came into the room with a photo album in hand. "Dad, look what I found in the attic," he said, flipping through pages filled with faded photographs of Marta's life, a smile, her hands in the garden, moments frozen in time. We sat together, remembering her. "She would be proud of how far we've come," I said softly. He nodded. "We've done more than survive. We've created something better." And we had. The house had become a community hub. Every week, people from all walks of life came to our cooking classes, garden workshops, and storytelling nights. We shared laughter, recipes, tears, and memories. It was in those moments I realized the poison a line tried to slip into my life hadn't just been physical. It was meant to destroy trust, hope, and family. But instead, it sparked a fire to rebuild. One particular evening, a young man came up to me after class. "Mr. Jorge, your story gave me courage. I'm dealing with betrayal in my own family, and sometimes it feels like the end." I smiled, feeling the weight of years in my heart. It's never the end. It's a beginning. Sometimes the hardest slice to take is the first one, but once you taste it, you can decide what to do with the rest. As I spoke, I thought back to that day when I gave a line the first slice of cake. It wasn't just about testing her, it was about reclaiming my power, my voice, and my safety. I looked at Marcos and saw the man he had become, strong, kind, and wise beyond his years. We had weathered storms together, and our bond was unbreakable. But life, as it often does, continued to bring challenges. One day, Marcos came to me with news. "Dad, I'm thinking about starting a family. I want my kids to grow up in a world where trust isn't fragile, where love is fierce." My heart swelled. "Then we'll make sure they grow up knowing how to protect what matters, just like we did." We began planning a new chapter, one filled with hope, lessons learned, and a legacy of strength. And though the past would always be a part of us, it no longer held power over our future. Because we had faced the poison head-on, and we had chosen life. The years that followed were filled with the quiet work of healing and growth. Marcos had started a family of his own, 2 beautiful children who brought light and laughter into our lives. Watching them grow reminded me every day of why I had fought so hard to protect our family. But with every new beginning comes reflection on the past, on the choices we made, the scars we carry, and the lessons we pass on. One afternoon, I found myself sitting on the porch, my hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea, watching my grandchildren chase each other through the garden. Their laughter was pure, untouched by the complexities of adult pain. Marcos joined me, settling into the chair beside me. "Dad," he said quietly, "sometimes I worry about what we went through. I wonder if it will ever truly be behind us." I looked at him, seeing both the weight of his memories and the strength he carried. "The past is a part of us, son, but it doesn't have to define us. It's like the garden, sometimes storms tear through it, but with care, new life grows stronger." We talked about a line, about betrayal and forgiveness. Forgiveness had never come easily to me, not for her, not for the hurt she caused. But I realized forgiveness wasn't about absolving her of guilt, it was about freeing myself from the bitterness that could consume me. I told Marcos how I had struggled with that for years, How the poison she tried to feed me lingered not just in my body, but in my mind. Letting go, I said, is the hardest thing, but it's the only way to truly heal. That evening, I found Marta's old recipe book again. It was worn now, pages stained with years of flour and love. I began writing notes in the margins, lessons learned, memories, warnings. I wanted to leave more than recipes to my grandchildren. I wanted to leave a guide for life, how to trust, how to be cautious, how to love fiercely but protect fiercely too. Marcos helped me turn those notes into a little book. We called it The First Slice, Lessons from Life and Love. It became something more than just a family keepsake. Friends and neighbors asked for copies. Soon, the book was being shared beyond our small town. People wrote to me, sharing their own stories of betrayal, survival, and hope. One letter stood out. It was from a woman who had been hurt by someone she trusted, just like me. She wrote, "Your story gave me courage to stand up and protect myself. Thank you for reminding me that I am not alone." That message reminded me why I had to keep sharing, to turn pain into purpose. One spring morning, I walked through the garden, surrounded by blooming roses and jasmine. The scent filled the air, a reminder of Marta's love and the strength it gave me. I paused by the bench where we used to sit together. I whispered a silent thank you for the past, for the pain, and for the future. Because life is like that cake. Sometimes it looks sweet on the outside, but you have to be careful what's inside. And sometimes, you have to be brave enough to take the first bite, to protect yourself, to protect those you love, and to choose the life you want to live. The sun was dipping low over the horizon, casting long, golden shadows across the garden where I sat, surrounded by the blooms Marta had loved so dearly. The fragrance of roses and jasmine wrapped around me like a soft embrace, a reminder of everything we had lost and everything we had rebuilt. As the years passed, I often found myself reflecting on the twists and turns of fate that had brought me here, alive, whole, and still fighting. But the fight was no longer against a hidden poison. It was a fight to preserve love, to nurture trust, and to break the cycles of pain that had almost consumed my family. Marcos was different now, not just a man who survived betrayal, but a father teaching his children how to navigate a world where shadows sometimes lurk behind smiles. One afternoon, Marcos invited me to a school event. His children were performing a small play about courage and kindness. Watching them on stage, I felt a swelling pride I hadn't known since Marta's passing. The innocence in their eyes, the laughter that erupted from the crowd, it was a reminder of what we fought for. After the play, Marcos and I walked home in the cool evening air. "Dad," he said, "I've been thinking about everything we've been through. How do you keep going when the past still haunts you?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "It's not about forgetting, son. It's about carrying the past with you without letting it weigh you down. Like carrying a heavy bag, you don't throw it away, but you learn to walk taller with it." He nodded thoughtfully. I told him about the book we had written together, The First Slice. How sharing our story had helped so many others find their own strength. "Stories connect us," I said. "They remind us we're not alone. And sometimes, sharing your pain is the first step to healing." That night, back home, I found myself going through old letters and messages people had sent over the years. Each one was a thread, weaving a tapestry of human experience, betrayal, resilience, hope. One letter, from a woman in a distant city, caught my attention. She wrote about her own story, of a family torn apart by deceit, but also of forgiveness and rebuilding. Her words reminded me that pain and healing are universal, that no matter where we come from, the challenges we face echo through our hearts. In the weeks that followed, I received more letters, stories from people who had faced betrayal, who had found ways to survive and rebuild. It became clear that our story was no longer just ours. It was a beacon, a light in the darkness for many. This realization brought a new purpose. Marcos and I began organizing workshops and support groups, creating spaces where people could share, learn, and heal together. The community center became a sanctuary, filled with voices once silenced by fear and pain. Through it all, I kept coming back to one truth: the poison we fear most isn't always what's in the cake. It's the doubt, the fear, the broken trust that threatens to destroy us from within. But if we are brave enough to face it, to take that first bite, we reclaim our power. We choose life. We choose love. Years later, as I sat once more in the garden, watching my grandchildren chase butterflies, I felt a deep peace settle within me. Marta's spirit was there in every flower, every breeze, every smile. And so was mine. The man who faced poison not with fear, but with courage. The man who gave the first slice, not to test, but to protect. Because sometimes, the sweetest moments come only after the bitterest bites. Time doesn't ask for permission to pass, it just does. And as it goes, it takes with it the details of youth, the fears we used to have, the faces we loved, but it also leaves behind its marks. Some good, some painful, scars and flowers. It was a cold autumn morning when I truly realized that I was growing old. Not the kind of old that aches in your bones, I had grown used to that long ago. I mean the kind that weighs behind your eyes, when you understand you've lived more days than you have left to live. I sat in the garden, as I often did. The leaves were falling slowly, and the air smelled of wet earth and change. My granddaughter, Clara, came running, her hair a wild mess, her voice filled with innocence and life. "Grandpa, Mom let me bring some cake. Can I give you the first slice?" For a moment, my body froze. Funny how certain phrases never lose their weight, not even after so many years. She didn't know, of course. To her, it was just kindness, tradition, but for me, that sentence echoed like a ghost from the past. A past that had changed everything. I smiled, hiding the small sting that crossed my heart like a sudden cold wind in summer. "No, sweetheart, did you try it first?" She shook her head, still smiling, not understanding the deeper meaning. "Then do that. If it's good, we'll share it." She giggled, took a bite, and offered me the second slice. It was delicious, chocolate with a hint of orange. Marta would have loved it, and in that moment, between Clara's laughter and the sweet taste of the cake, I understood, truly, what that first slice had come to mean. It was no longer an act of suspicion. It was protection, love. It was about teaching, not through fear, but through awareness. It was about looking at the world without naivety, but also without losing tenderness. That night, I wrote a new entry in my journal, the same one I'd been writing in since everything happened. A kind of conversation with myself and with Marta. "My dear, today I realized that the slice I gave a line all those years ago wasn't just an act of survival. It was the beginning of our second chance. It was the moment truth set me free, and, at the same time, it made me responsible for protecting our family forever." Today, Clara offered me cake, and I smiled, because I'm not afraid anymore. I feel love. In the following weeks, I finished something I had long been delaying, the final version of our book, The First Slice, now rewritten as a collection of stories, letters, recipes, reflect-irons, and above all, truths. Hard truths, but necessary ones. Truths like, not every smile is sincere. Sometimes, poison smells like vanilla. Trust is something built day by day, and broken in seconds. And most importantly, true love never needs to be disguised. I gave a copy of the manuscript to Marcos. He held the book like a living inheritance. His eyes were glassy, but steady. "Are you sure you want this published?" he asked. "It's the most vulnerable part of our story." "Exactly," I said, "because there are other Arthurs out there, other Martas, other Marcoses and Claras, and maybe right now one of them is holding a slice of cake, not knowing whether to trust." He nodded. The first print was small, made with care, no publicity, just for the community, friends, and those who had followed our story since the beginning. But the book spread like the scent of freshly baked cake. And so, at 81 years old, I became the most unlikely author of a story that was born from poison and bloomed into healing. On my next birthday, the family organized a small celebration, a picnic in the garden, with soft music and sweet memories. When Clara came up to me, now 11, she handed me a handmade gift box. Inside was a small recipe notebook she had created herself. Colorful, messy, and beautiful. On the dedication page, she wrote, "For Grandpa Arthur, who taught me to always taste the first slice, not just of cake, but of life." I cried. Not from pain, from gratitude, from relief, from knowing that, despite everything, the best of us remained. Because in the end, this story was never about an attempt at poisoning. It was about survival. It was about love that resists, that teaches, that spreads like strong roots in good soil. It was about the choice not to be poisoned from the inside. It was about offering the first slice, and living to tell the story. Time skip, 18 years later the world had changed. The town I grew up in felt smaller now. The trees that once towered over me when I was a child now looked almost fragile, like memories trying to stretch into the present. The house, my grandfather's house, was still there, still full of life. Still surrounded by that impossible garden of roses and jasmine. But the chair on the porch was empty, and that silence, it was louder than anything else. My name is Clara. I'm 29 now. A writer, a mother, a woman trying to make the right choices in a world that's messier and crueler than the fairy tales ever warned us about. My grandfather, Arthur, passed away peacefully 2 years ago, just a few days before his 89th birthday. We all thought he would live forever. In a way, he did. After his book, The First Slice, was published for the public, something strange happened. It didn't just go viral. It spread through people, through kitchens and classrooms, libraries and community centers, through families who had never learned how to talk about betrayal, or trust, or quiet grief. My grandfather didn't just survive what a line did. He rewrote its meaning. He turned poison into purpose. He turned fear into strength. And now, it was my turn. It started with the man I was about to marry, Jonas. He was charming, soft-spoken, attentive. He loved my son, Leo, like his own. Or so I thought. But then I started seeing signs, little ones, quiet as dust. He would joke about me not needing to work once we married. He would correct me in front of others, subtly but consistently. My friends felt uneasy around him, but never said anything directly. Then, one night, I found a message on his phone he hadn't meant me to see. It wasn't cheating. It was worse. He was planning to take over the deed to my grandfather's home, the house I had inherited. He wanted to renovate it into an Ebb-style business, without telling me. He'd been talking to an investor. He described me in those messages as emotionally attached and easy to manipulate if I play the long game. I felt like the floor collapsed beneath me. How could I have missed it? How could someone love me, love Leo, and be calculating behind the scenes? My hands trembled. I stayed up all night, crying, but not just from pain, from fury, because he thought I was weak. He thought I was naive. But he forgot who raised me. The next morning, I stood in the kitchen. The same kitchen where my grandfather had once stared down a plate of poisoned cake and made the choice that saved our family. I took out the old recipe book, the one I had given him as a child, which he had quietly added to over the years. It now included his notes, his wisdom, even his handwriting, shaky but certain. The first slice is always yours. Not because you don't trust others, but because you trust yourself first. I knew what I had to do. That weekend, I invited Jonas to the house. I baked a cake. Orange chocolate, just like the one I once offered my grandfather when I was 6. Only this time, the roles had reversed. We sat on the porch. He smiled, unaware of what I had discovered. "This looks amazing," he said. "I didn't know you still baked." "It's a special recipe," I said, handing him a plate. He reached for it. "Wait," I said, smiling. "Let me have the first slice." He paused, surprised. Just for a second. I watched him closely, and in that single moment, the smallest hesitation in his eyes, I saw everything I needed to see. It wasn't about the cake. It was about what the cake revealed. He had spent months trying to manipulate me, but he never realized he was walking into the house Arthur built. He didn't know this wasn't just a home, it was a fortress, built on generations of wisdom, survival, and strength. I took the first bite. It was perfect. He smiled nervously, and I offered him the next slice. I didn't need to poison him. He had already exposed himself. What came next was simple. I confronted him with the messages. I told him he had no place in our home, or in our lives. I called a lawyer. I chose myself. I chose Leo. Later that week, I walked back out to the garden. I sat in the chair my grandfather once loved. I looked out at the sun setting across the garden, lighting up the roses like fire, and I realized the legacy of the first slice wasn't about fear. It was about intuition, about boundaries, about choosing to taste the truth, no matter how bitter it might be, and from that truth, building something sweeter. I opened the final letter my grandfather had written me, a letter he had left sealed, to be opened when I turned 29. Inside, in his still careful hand, were just a few lines. "Clara, my darling girl, if you're reading this, it means life has tested you. Trust yourself, even when the world tells you not to. The first slice is not a trap, it's a torch. Carry it bravely. You are more than my legacy. You are the future I fought for. Love always, Grandpa Arthur." I cried for a long time. Then I stood up, wiped my tears, and went inside to bake a new cake, this time, with Leo at my side. Because one day, he will offer someone the first slice, and I want him to know exactly what it means.